Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is John Van Lunen, and you are listening to Treasures of the Outer Banks. We're in episode 21, and in this episode, I sat down and talked with Mark Buckler. He lives right here in Southern Shores, and he is a wildlife photographer. He has a business called Mark Buckler Photography, where he takes customers on photography tours. Now, most of his tours are right here on the Outer Banks, but he also does tours in Alaska, Africa, and the Arctic. What he reminded me was that this area is just bursting with wildlife. We have our black bears, red wolves, wild horses, alligators, migrating birds, and more. Basically, we have so many great opportunities right here in our backyard for outstanding wildlife photography. If you like wildlife photography, I think you're going to like this episode with Mark Buckler. So sit back and enjoy. So you're in Alaska. The salmon are spawning. You're sitting in a cold stream somewhere in the wilderness, and you see a bear running at you. Describe to me what you're feeling, what you're seeing, what you're doing.
Pure exhilaration.
All right.
I don't think there's anything more exciting that I do than having a bear running at eye level while you're sitting in a stream, crashing through the water at kind of full steam and pouncing
Right.
on salmon right in front of you.
Right.
It just is completely just the most exhilarating experience, and to see something that powerful and just crashing through the water and trying to capture an image of it doing its thing is.
And what's your fear level at that point?
Almost none.
Right.
There are a couple of factors going into that. It's, part of it is my background. I've got several decades of experience studying wildlife. My degree's in wildlife biology. I have a very good understanding of wildlife and wildlife behavior. And so the other factor is that these bears have been fishing for salmon for thousands of years, and they really have no interest in anything else. They're not interested in eating me because they have plenty of food around that's probably much easier to catch than me. And they're just so busy gorging on salmon that they pretty much ignore you.
Right.
And you still have to be aware and vigilant, and
Right.
and monitor the bears and keep an eye on them. But they routinely will walk within just a few feet of you.
And what is your response? I mean, is it just no eye contact? Don't move, or
I guess the official response is, a lot of this is within Katmai National Park, which is a massive wilderness area, and there's a rule, a regulation there that you have to stay 50 yards away from a bear.
okay.
However, there are certain situations where if a bear approaches you, it's actually safer to stay put and let the bear do its thing rather than stand up and move away from the bear, which could be perceived as a threat to the
Right. bear.
And so, you have to use your noggin a little bit and
Yeah.
use the knowledge that you have. For the record, I'm always 50 yards away from a bear, but the reality is that there are certain situations where you may not be able to do that, and it's a perfectly safe situation.
Right. And what kind of preparation do you have to do up there? I mean, I'm thinking, here's what I'm imagining. You probably had to get up kind of early. You had to hike in. You had to, set up your equipment. You dress for the occasion. What kind of preparation are you doing as you get into position?
Well, that's also what makes it probably my favorite trip that I've ever done, and I'm sure we'll talk about some other things that I've done and experienced and places that I've been. But what's really nice about the way that I like to photograph the bears in Alaska is I like to go to what I refer to as a fly-out lodge. So I'm in I'm literally in the middle of nowhere in this small village where there's a kind of a small cabin or some small cabins and a lodge that we operate out of, and we don't photograph bears around the lodge.
Right.
We jump in some kind of bush plane, whether it's a tundra plane that has tundra wheels on it so we can land on the tundra or on beaches, or most of the time we're in float planes, just kind of a classic de Havilland Beaver, and we go to wherever the best bear activity is, and that means we get we can always get to bears, because if you just go to a lodge and photograph bears at a lodge, in that general area, if the bears don't happen to be there, you're kind of out of luck. So we have this advantage of just flying literally to the middle of nowhere with very often nobody within 100 miles.
Wow.
And you get dropped off and you kind of hike into maybe where the bears are, because they're not always going to be near the little ponds that we land in, the float planes. And sometimes we even camp out right with the bears, and so that's what that makes it just a really fun, true wilderness experience.
Right.
It's a little bit it's a little different than an African safari a lot of people dream of, and you definitely need to go do that at some point if you're interested in wildlife. African safaris are amazing, but it's not necessarily kind of the same wilderness experience as the bears in Alaska.
Right.
Because in an African safari, you basically have to stay in the vehicle. You can't get out of a vehicle.
Oh, really?
And then most of the camps, in an African safari are more luxurious than my house. I mean, you're staying in tents, but they're large, luxurious tents, with that's nice.
And you just came back from a African safari.
I did. Yeah,
How did that go?
Back. It was fantastic.
Nice.
I mean, it's always fun to be in Africa.
And did you do a lot of photography there?
Yeah, that's all. That's the purpose of going is I run photo tours, here around Eastern North Carolina and the Outer Banks, which is my home base. Right. But I run a lot of photo tours all over the world, from doing polar bears in the Arctic to the grizzly bears that we talked about, to Africa and Iceland. And
you've taken students to the Arctic?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So these are, when I run these trips, they're not they're not solo trips, and I'm not necessarily selling photographs. Right. I'm not photographing for a magazine or anything like that. What I do is I run photo tours and take people on trips.
Is that strictly your business?
It is. Yeah. I mean, I sell photos, and you can see photos of mine in magazines and on billboards, even around here. But I'll sell stuff for people's walls too if they want it. But I don't even put things in galleries here anymore, because I'm too busy running all over the Outer Banks, taking people around and showing them the amazing photography here and the amazing nature and the wildlife, or somewhere else in the world.
Excellent. So let's stick to close to home a little bit. Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge is right around the corner here, and I have to admit, I'm late to the party. I've lived here 25 years, and all of a sudden I keep thinking there's bears over there. My wife and we rented a couple of e-bikes and just rode around and checked out the bears. Very cool. I highly recommend it.
It's.
So tell me about your experiences over there, or your classes over there.
Well, and it's not just Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. From where we're sitting right now in Kitty Hawk, there's basically 11 national wildlife refuges within a 2-hour drive of Kitty Hawk, and that I think the total acreage is 750,000 acres of land in national wildlife refuges in northeastern North Carolina and a couple up in southeastern Virginia, just over the North Carolina border. And that's that. The wildlife refuges and the nature and the photography opportunities is what brought me here 18, 19 years ago.
Is that right?
I think for what I like to photograph, which is wildlife primarily, but also just nature, landscapes, beautiful scenery. I would say that the Outer Banks rivals any place in North America for its photography opportunities. You've got, in eastern North Carolina, not here on the barrier island itself, although every once in a while a bear will make its way over here. But quite rarely. But just on the other side of the Sound, in eastern North Carolina, on the Albemarle Pamlico Peninsula, you've got the highest concentration of black bears in the world.
That's crazy. And
you've also got they happen to be the largest black bears in the world as well. Now, not all of them are large, but the world record black bear is from this area at 880 pounds. Crazy. And that's a big bear. That's bigger than an average grizzly bear.
Is that right?
Yep.
I was trying to wonder how they compared to the grizzly, but
yeah,
I always thought the grizzly bear was bigger.
Well, they generally are.
The record is
but if you take the largest black bear, it's bigger than kind of an average grizzly.
Gotcha.
But there's some big differences. But you've got the bears here. You've got wild horses on the beach up north in Corolla, which is a very unique situation. There aren't a lot of places in the world where you can find wild horses in the dunes and down by the ocean. And you've got the most endangered mammal on the planet, also over at Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge with the red wolf.
Right. Have you had a chance to spot them at all?
Yeah,
because they're very shy, right?
Well, they're shy. Well, yeah, they tend to be fairly active at night and at dawn and dusk, and so you have to be out there at those times to really see them. They're generally not very active during the day, and there's so few of them right now. There's I think there's 20 to 25 of them in the wild right now.
Yeah, and when I'm sorry to cut you off, but when you go to Alligator River, are you pretty much just planting yourself in the blind somewhere, or are you moving around as the day wears on? Or?
No, well, I may sit and plant myself somewhere if I have a handle on particular behavior that might be happening with bears or other wildlife in an area. But generally, it's an area where when I take people there, we just drive around, and when we see something, we get out and photograph.
Okay.
That's one of the things that makes it so nice. You don't, and
you don't have to use the bush plane to fly in.
No,
you don't have to camp out.
No, and you don't, and you don't need to walk through the woods, or that's not a real good idea. That's how you get in trouble with bears is, if you surprise a bear, that's, so kind of walking through the woods looking for bear is not always the best way to go about it. There's so much open space out there, and the bears spend a lot of time out in the open.
Right.
And so, you don't have to put yourself in a situation where you're in any kind of danger from the bear.
What about birds of prey? Do you get into birds of prey at all?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, any wildlife, I love to spend time with and photograph. And so, in this area, you've got bald eagles, you've got all kinds of hawks and osprey, and but one of the favorites to photograph, especially at Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge, are the owls, especially the barred owls. They are quite cooperative.
Is that right?
And there are usually several pairs in one particular area that are visible frequently.
Is that right?
And barred owls, at least in Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge, are quite diurnal. So they're active during the day, and they can be active hunting all day long.
Is that right? Because I'm here on the Dogwood Trail. I hear great horned owls fairly often.
Yep.
And I've never seen one.
Yeah.
So I'm determined to see an owl at some point in time. But
yeah, the great horned owls are definitely much more nocturnal.
Gotcha.
And they tend to be a little bit more difficult to see.
Is that right? They blend in better.
Yeah. And the best way is to locate their nest, which they are pretty much building right now.
Is that right?
Yeah, they'll have the owls, especially the great horned owls. They'll have eggs down probably in January.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Are they trying to find a knoll, or are they building a traditional nest on branches?
Great horned owls generally are going to build a nest, kind of out of sticks. Kind of similar to a typical nest. Okay. But the barred owls are cavity nesters, and so they nest inside holes in trees and that sort of thing.
That's good to know. Now I know what to look for. So tell me about your class a little bit. What would a typical student expect? Is each locale a little different? What are a few main topics you would tell a student? I'm sure there's some basic photography concepts or skills that you might.
Yeah, it's all different because everyone brings a different set of skills to a photography tour. Some people are professional level photographers that go out with me, but most people are novice to intermediate, just enthusiast, hobbyist photographers, amateur photographers, and so what's nice is all of my groups tend to be small. Right. Trips around here, I'm usually just taking out 3, maybe 4 people at the most at a time. And then some of the bigger trips like Alaska and Africa is usually 4 to 6 people at the most. And so with such a small group, I can tailor what I can do for people to meet their needs. If they need help with just learning how to use their camera, I can usually do that. Although that's I would say that if you need help learning how to use your camera, that's better done as a kind of one-on-one private thing. Right. Most people that come on the trips should have a basic understanding of how to use their camera. Right. But other than that, if someone needs help with, the thing that most people need help with, I probably spend 70% of my time helping people understand exposure and how to get the proper exposure with their gear. That's a lot of people think they understand exposure, but they really don't understand it as well as they think they do. And it's also the most challenging concept for most people to understand. It's very abstract. It involves numbers. It can be counterintuitive at times. And so it's a very difficult concept to understand in the first place.
Does that change with the daylight as well? I mean, is it kind of a sliding scale?
Well, it's actually a lot easier than most people make it out to be.
Gotcha.
But you have to have that basic understanding of how your camera looks at the world, and apply the very basics of light and exposure to each situation.
Gotcha.
But most people make it harder than it needs to be.
Excellent. So how do you choose where you're going to go? I mean, are you following the seasons a little bit, or you're following migration, or whatever? How are you making up those decisions?
Well, I go to places that I want to go to.
First and foremost.
Yeah, I mean, I am fairly selfish that way.
Sure.
But the good news is there are a lot of places that I want to go to. But it is also a business, so I have to go to places that other people want to go to as well. And so, the decision is there are plenty of places to go that I'm interested in, and other people are as well.
Right.
And when to go just depends on what kind of maybe wildlife you're looking for, what kind of landscape you're looking for, and that can change based on season.
Right.
If your goal is to photograph, the northern lights or the aurora in Iceland, you don't want to go in the summer,
right?
Because there is no nighttime. Now the aurora can be happening, you just can't see it because it's daylight, pretty much 24 hours a day, or close to it. So so if that's your goal, you obviously don't want to go at that time of year. And if your goal is to photograph bears fishing for salmon, which, as I said, is pretty much my favorite thing, you need to go when the salmon are running.
Right.
Which in Alaska, basically, July through September.
Right.
Is so you need to go then.
So skipping around just a hair, your background is in biology. Do your trips ever turn into a kind of a simplified biology class? This is what they're doing. This is why the salmon are running, and this is whatever, why they're fattening up or whatever.
Yeah, I got into what I really like to think that I offer to folks is not just an outing to go photograph brown bears or polar bears or lions or something like that. And it's not just helping them improve their photography and teaching them some of the skills that they might need help with, but it's also educating them about the natural world and nature. And that's my background is wildlife biology. That's my degree. I've got a lot of experience studying and researching wildlife in the field, and I also have quite a bit of experience as a teacher, right. Which I didn't think I was going to get into, but I ended up getting suckered into being a high school teacher for a long time. The good news is I was able to teach a wildlife biology course in high school, and that may be a story for a different day and maybe a glass of bourbon, but right. But I really fell in love with teaching, even though I didn't intend that to be a career.
There's also that factor where when you teach something, you become smarter about it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So maybe you learn a little bit more about it, or you learn how to convey the ideas better.
Yeah.
So I could definitely see where that's one of those one hand washes the other kind of thing.
Yeah, and most importantly, with what I do now, running the photography tours, with something like wildlife, and I tell this regardless of what you like to photograph. If you want to be an architectural photographer and that's your passion, that's what you like photographing is architecture. Well, the more you know about architecture and the more you can learn about it, the better images you're going to be able to create. Right. Because you'll be able to basically demonstrate the nuances of the architecture that I wouldn't be able to understand. And so the same is true certainly with wildlife. And I think what my high level of skill as a wildlife photographer and being able to make great wildlife images is not just, half of it is kind of photographic skill. Right. The other half is my knowledge of the subject. I have a very good understanding of wildlife, and and that's not just where to find it, but being able to predict, well, what's this animal going to do next? Yeah. So I can create a more compelling image than just a snapshot of a bear. Yeah. Or a lion, and you capture something that's just more compelling and grabs people's attention.
So it sounds like obviously you're a teacher of photography, but you're also a bit of a guide.
Yeah.
I mean, you are taking these people out there on a little safari.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so I'm sure there's all kinds of logistical things you need to get ready for these people. You got to take care of these people.
Safe to be around. We do a bear briefing and tell people how we're going to behave to keep ourselves safe, but also to respect the wildlife and not disturb it.
Right.
Just to get a stupid picture.
Yeah.
And that's one of the more frustrating things that I deal with.
Adults acting like children.
Well, is out at the refuge. There are other people. It's a public area that you're free to kind of go explore on your own. But the number of people that are disturbing the wildlife and harassing the wildlife
right.
is a little upsetting at times. And
there's a lot of issues with the horses on the North Beach.
Yeah, well,
they're surrounded by people and houses.
And in some cases, it's not people intentionally harassing the wildlife. It's a situation of ignorance,
right?
And they just don't know that what they're doing is causing the bear harm, or
right.
It's just not fair to the bear or the owl or the alligator, or whatever it is. People have a tendency to, when they go photograph wildlife, and so I guess I'm getting into a little bit of instruction now, but when people go photograph wildlife, very often their first instinct is, oh my gosh, there's a bear up ahead of us. And they try to get as close as they can to the bear. In some cases, they try and get as close as they can and maintain a safe distance, which is always a good idea. But the best photograph and the best way to view a bear is not always as close as possible. Right. The best image can be far away, and very often is a distance away, so that you don't alter the bear's behavior, so that it does what it naturally does, and you end up
Sometimes people aren't much different, right?
No.
We all know when we have that camera a foot away from our face, we don't take our best pictures. So we might be better off just keeping our distance.
Well, and it's always good to assess the situation.
Right.
Because, again, it's not just about being close. That's not what makes a great picture. And, everyone has a camera in their pocket these days with their phones. And, in that situation, that's not the right equipment to be photographing a bear with.
Right.
You really, for wildlife, you need telephoto lenses,
right.
and the ability to kind of zoom in and maintain a distance from the animal.
Right. So if you act as a guide with your teaching groups, you probably still have some relationships with guides on the ground, say in Alaska or Africa or something like that. Have you created any relationships with people over the years that you go back to every year, and they just kind of point you in the right direction, or have the place kind of ready for you?
Yeah, a place like Alaska, I've spent so much time there that yes, very often a guide, a dedicated bear guide, will accompany me and my group on a trip. But very often on that trip, I am the bear guide as well, just because I have so much experience there with the bears and in the areas that we're going to take people to photograph the bears. But, other trips like Africa, in Africa, you hire a guide there. Yeah. I mean, and the guide drives you around in the vehicle, and that's the way you have to do that. Well, you don't have to do it that way. There are certain places you can drive yourself around in Africa. But if at all possible, doing it with a guide who works every day out in an area
and knows
and
the
knows
area,
exactly,
and knows the animals,
and knows
to some
the
degree.
specific animals, knows their patterns, knows, has a sense of what the animal has been doing for the past week, the past 2 weeks, and has a sense of its patterns. Doing that just increases. Now, there's certain guides that are better than others. And so, if at all possible, I try and get the best guides possible. Or there's, some camps in Africa where all the guides at a particular camp are all really good. And so I tend to go to those camps.
Is that right?
More often. Polar bears, that's definitely, that requires some kind of guide.
Who's manning those stations?
Well, there's a couple ways you can do polar bears. The recent trip I did this past August with polar bears was out of basically an archipelago north of Norway called Svalbard, and that is a ship-based expedition.
Okay.
And so,
what nation is running that?
Well, it's our Svalbard is a part of Norway.
Okay.
It's essentially governed by Norway, and you're basically about 10 degrees away from the North Pole.
Yeah.
So it's pretty far up there, and the ship that I chose to use is a small ship. There were only 13 passengers on board the ship, and there's an expedition leader.
Comfortable?
Yeah, very comfortable. I mean, yeah, very comfortable. I mean, they're small berths or beds, and small rooms, like on kind of on any cruise ship. The rooms tend to be quite small, but the only time you're in your room is when you're sleeping, because otherwise you're out either looking for wildlife or you are out photographing some wildlife.
Yeah.
So it's and it's 24 hours of daylight there in the summer, and there's an expedition leader and an assistant expedition leader.
And are you on skis, sleds? I mean, what do you?
No, we're on a ship.
But you get out on the ice floe or the ice pack, and
well, what happens is when you see a bear or some other wildlife or something that you may want to go investigate or photograph, there are small little inflatable zodiacs on the ship, and you hoist those over the side, and you get into those with the expedition leaders, and you go chase or photograph the wildlife.
Amazing.
So most of it's photographing from the ship. You don't.
Okay.
You
most times
you don't go onto land where there's a polar bear. That's not a real
not a place to hide.
Not a real wise maneuver.
Right.
There's always a chance that you could go on land and a polar bear arrives while you're on the land. At which case you get back in the boat. But
right. Right.
But we're talking guides with rifles and in front and behind the group. You got to be a little careful around polar bears.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And
you got to be careful around all bears in general.
How much bigger are polar bears?
They're big.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're big. Their paws are they're the size of dinner plates. I mean, they're just massive, powerful animals.
Amazing.
Yeah.
How would you compare NC black bears with the bears you see in Alaska?
Well, they're different. I mean, the bears here in the eastern United States are black bears, whereas the bears in Alaska are grizzly or brown bears. Grizzly and brown bears are the same animal, same species. They just have a designation as to grizzly bear or brown bear, essentially based on what it feeds on.
Oh, really?
So brown bears feed on coastal resources, like salmon, whereas grizzly bears do not. They do not feed on coastal resources. And so generally inland inland brown bears are grizzly bears.
Right.
So,
And what are they feeding off?
They feed off other animals, elk, bison. They'll feed off of whatever meat
They'd have to be pretty opportunistic because I can't imagine an elk being caught by a bear.
Yeah, I mean, but deer, things like that. Now, black bears don't do that, but black bears don't often eat much meat unless they happen to come across a carcass or something like that. And they generally, in most places, don't fish for their food. There are some places where black bears do fish for food, but but bears are also omnivorous. They don't just eat meat; they eat lots of berries. Right. And the black bears here, they're eating primarily a kind of vegetation, forbs and grasses and things like that, but also insects.
It's amazing to think that they can maintain their size on a mostly vegetarian diet.
And fruits and berries, whatever might be in season. But the black bears out here, one of the reasons they also get so big is they have access to agricultural crops. Yeah. Eastern North Carolina is very heavy with agriculture, and bears especially love corn.
Is that right?
They eat a lot of corn.
And I guess over Alligator River, they keep some of those crops. Don't they plant some crops?
There are crops that are planted there. Usually, it's by private farmers who lease out the land to grow crops, and some of the crops are even left behind as a resource for wildlife. But they will get heavy into the crops, and in some years there's no corn planted at the refuge. It all depends, it's really up to the farmer, I guess. I don't know all the details of the relationship between the Fish and Wildlife Service and the farmers, but this year I don't think there was any corn at all. I can't remember whether there was corn planted this year or not.
I noticed some fields over there, but I couldn't tell if they had anything.
Yeah, lots of soybean this year.
And the bears would eat that too, probably, right?
They don't eat the soybeans.
No.
You'll see them in soybean fields, though, and especially while the soybeans are growing and producing new shoots, they will nibble on that, and they'll also root around for insects and grubs in the soil and that sort of thing. But they don't eat the soybeans.
Huh. So a small percentage of your business is selling prints, photos?
Yeah, very small, but...
Do you have any consistent buyers, or is it just kind of, is it typical freelancing? You just,
It's, just whoever finds out about my photography. I guess probably one of the more regular ones is Our State magazine.
Oh, good magazine, yeah.
Yeah, very great magazine. So I'm proud to have images in there regularly.
Yeah, excellent.
And if I were better at maintaining a library for them, I'm sure images would be in there. But I don't think
that'd be another full-time job, pretty much.
Yeah, it takes up, the other stuff that I do, the photo tours, takes up so much time because.
How many trips a year are you averaging?
I have I don't know. Probably a good. I'm running trips 150 days a year.
That's fine.
Yeah. So, most of those trips are, local, where I get to sleep in my own bed each night, but, some of them are, in faraway places. Okay.
Because this podcast kind of centers around the Outer Banks, could you give us a few examples of your local trips? I mean, just tell us, what you might do with a couple different groups.
Yeah.
What areas?
I run
what
a
areas
bunch
you might go to?
Of different trips around here. I do a lot. We've been talking a lot about wildlife, and that is what I spend a lot of my time photographing. And so that would be, trips to photograph the wild horses, trips to photograph
Corova Beach.
Yeah, up in the four-wheel drive area in Corolla.
And I'm sorry to cut you off, but are you providing? Did you get a van and throw everybody in the van?
No, I just use my own vehicle.
Your truck,
just use my
because you only have 3 or 4 people with you anyway.
Yeah, so. And so prior to 2 years ago, I had a four-wheel drive Chevy Suburban that I'd be able to transport 4 or 5 people comfortably. But I'm now down to a slightly smaller four-wheel drive vehicle that's even better off-road.
Right.
And now I'll take 3 people on most trips, and if it's a group of people that maybe know each other and they want to squeeze a 4th in, it's doable.
Gotcha.
But generally it's just 3 people.
Okay.
That gives plenty of room for gear and the ability to go off road on the beaches and even in other areas. But it could be wild horses, could be black bears, it could be I do bird photography in the summer here with a lot of the shorebirds and water birds. And then we're getting right now into waterfowl photography season, because swans and snow geese have really just arrived in large numbers. And so I spent a lot of time in December, January, and February photographing the ducks, geese, and swans that sorry for the pun, that flock here in the wintertime. In such large numbers. And like you were saying earlier, you were somewhat unaware of the bears at Alligator River, and another phenomenon that happens here every year and has for centuries is the inundation of ducks, geese, and swans in northeastern North Carolina in the wintertime. Most people have no idea that northeastern North Carolina, including the Outer Banks, is one of the most significant wintering areas for ducks, geese, and swans in North America, and certainly for the tundra swans.
Right.
And it's in this area in the winter. There are certain areas where you can go, like Poquoson Lakes National Wildlife Refuge.
Is that like Columbia?
Yeah, it's kind of between Columbia and Plymouth.
Right.
The visitor center is in Columbia for Poquoson Lakes, but there's an area of the refuge called the Pungo Unit where you can see sometimes 100,000 snow geese in a flock.
Wow. Have you been to Mattamuskeet?
Yep. Again,
haven't been there. I got to check it out.
You got to go check it out as well. I mean, these are world-class kind of wildlife spectacles, is what I call them. And Lake Mattamuskeet is another national wildlife refuge. It's the largest natural lake in North Carolina.
Is it?
And the entire lake and some of the perimeter is part of the National Wildlife Refuge. I think it's a 50,000 acre lake or somewhere in that vicinity. And each winter, that lake has 300,000 ducks, geese, or swans on it each winter. Now, it's a big lake, and they tend to concentrate in, the birds on the lake tend to concentrate in an area that you don't really have access to.
Okay.
But occasionally, they're right next to the highway, but there are also some impoundments and small bodies of water on the edge of the lake that you can drive through and just see thousands and thousands of birds, and it's spectacular even to just listen to.
I got to check that out.
Yeah.
So we're kind of wrapping things up now. Feel free to promote your product. What's your website called?
Website is Buckler Photo, so it's my last name, bucklerphoto.com.
Right. And they can get information on your tours and all that other
stuff. Yeah, all my stuff's listed there, and that primarily is a vehicle, at least right now, where people can sign up and learn about the trips that I offer. There are some of my images are up there as well in a gallery. But probably the best way to keep up with me is on, like everybody else, social media.
Right.
And that Instagram and Facebook is where I'm at right now, and that's just at Mark Buckler Photography.
Gotcha. Yep.
And that's a
good
way
on
to
Instagram, and always some great photos you got posted on there. Love seeing your photos.
Yeah, I've been a little. I took some time off from social media over the last month or two since I got back from Africa, because the past few months before that were just a whirlwind of traveling the world. I mean, I literally was not home for nearly 3 months.
Is that right?
Yeah. No, I was polar bears for 2 weeks in the Arctic. I flew home for 6 hours and went to Alaska for 2 weeks.
Oh boy.
Then I was back here on the Outer Banks for a couple of weeks, and then it was straight to Africa for 3 weeks.
Your wife must be very understanding.
I have the best wife on the planet. She normally I try not to schedule things like that.
Right.
But COVID caused some postponements,
Gotcha.
and then dates are then limited because all of us tour leaders are trying to cram stuff in, and so it just hopefully will be much more spread out.
Excellent.
But no, she takes care of the 4 boys in the household while I'm gone, and
right.
Although she did, the reason I came home for 6 hours in between polar bears and Alaska bears is she got to go to Alaska with me.
Oh, cool.
On my brown bear or Alaska bear trip this year. So
and is she on the trail with you, or?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I wasn't sure if she was sipping cognac in the cabin.
No. She was out there.
Good.
Out there all the time.
Very exciting. Trudging
along and hanging out with bears and having a blast.
And how long is a wait for somebody who wants to get into one of your classes?
You never know. Certain trips will fill up, a year in advance.
Okay.
Generally, my Alaska bear trips are filled up a year in advance. Although this coming year in 2023, I've still got I think 5 spots left. So I don't know what's going on but there's availability on the Alaska bear trip, which is probably my favorite trip, as I've mentioned a couple of times. And then, other trips,
it sounds like there's almost always something you can choose from, unless you're really dialed into one specific venue.
Yeah, and I've got a trip that I'm announcing. Well, it's up on my website now, but I haven't officially announced it yet. I just booked a trip for Kenya.
Okay.
A photo safari in Kenya.
Nice.
In Africa, not until February of 2024. But
okay. What kind of animals would you?
And
expect?
that one, I am anticipating that once I send an email out announcing it to my so-called fan base, that will probably fill up within a day.
Wow. Nice.
So if you want in on it early,
see what the wife is doing.
Yeah, it's announced here on Treasures of the Outer Banks.
There you go. Perfect. You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Well, Mark, this was a great talk, and I learned so much about all the stuff around here. Very cool. I appreciate you coming out today.
Oh, no problem. Anytime. Hope to talk some more at some point.
That'd be great. You heard it here first again. Episode 2 on wilderness photography. I'd like to thank Mark Buckler for joining me today. Awesome time. If you'd like to learn more about Mark Buckler and what he's doing, you can go to bucklerphoto.com, and you can also follow him on Instagram or Facebook at Mark Buckler Photography. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you like this podcast, please leave a positive review on Spotify, Stitcher, or Apple Podcasts. I hope you check out our episode next week, and until then, make it a good one.